and welcome to the brain, which is our central nervous system, and cranial nerves, which is the peripheral nervous system. So those are the nerves that come off of the brain. So here we have an anterior and a posterior view of the brain. On the posterior view, you can see two little wrinkled structures down here. So posterior backside, anterior front. You can see these little wrinkly sides, and that can help you orient yourself to where the front and the back of the brain are. So you see these two wrinkled guys, you know you're looking at the posterior view and not the anterior view. On the anterior view, you can see the frontal lobe right there. And you can see a longitudinal fissure that runs the length of the brain, divides it into left and right. And then on the posterior, these little wrinkly structures, that's called the cerebellum. You can see the occipital lobe. So that is the occipital lobe. Same on both sides, on the back of the head. And now you kind of know what you're looking at. Okay, so here we are looking down at the brain from above. So we call this the superior view. So notice the anterior views right here. Posterior's back here. That means this is the left side of the brain, and that is the right side of the brain. Okay, so on the anterior side, we have our frontal lobes. Posterior, we have our occipital lobes. We have this longitudinal fissure that runs down the center. At the base of the longitudinal fissure, you have something called the corpus callosum. So that is actually what connects the left and right side of the brain. That is called the corpus callosum. Then we have left and right cerebral hemispheres. Why do they look different in this image? So for this image on this side of the brain, the right side of the brain, as a learning tool, they have removed the arachnoid mater. So the middle layer of the meninges, they removed it so you can see the grooves more clearly. Left side over here shows that arachnoid mater as stated. So cerebral veins and arteries covered by arachnoid mater. I think I said mater, arachnoid mater. Here they've removed it again for learning purposes so you can really see the grooves and divots. Okay. These grooves are called gyrus. The divots are called sulcus. So we'll talk about that in a second. Here we're looking at the side view or the lateral view. So it's the lateral view of the brain. This is the left side of the brain. Other one's going to be the right. And we know that cerebellum's on the back, occipital lobe's on the back. That's the front. So anterior, posterior. Lateral view of the brain, you can see the left side of the brain. The frontal lobe, again, is on the front. Occipital lobe is on the back. Cerebellum is this little wrinkled structure at the bottom. And they look like two wrinkled golf balls. We also have this lateral sulcus right here. So the lateral sulcus always has an artery laying in that groove. So it should be relatively easy to pinpoint, especially on an actual brain that you are looking at. Central sulcus right up here is a groove from the top all the way down to the lateral sulcus. Some grooves dead end to nowhere. So if you think that you're looking at the central sulcus, but it's not actually leading to another groove, you know that it's not the central sulcus because the central sulcus goes all the way down and connects with the lateral sulcus. Anytime you see sulcus, again, that's a groove. Anytime you see gyrus, that's a bump. Okay, so a precentral gyrus up here is a bump in front of the central sulcus. Central sulcus is here. Prefrontal gyrus is a bump in front of that central groove. So what would the bump behind the central sulcus be called? Post. So pre is before, post is after. Precentral gyrus is in front of the central sulcus. Post-central gyrus is behind the central sulcus. So pre-front, post-back. Remember, the sensory goes into the back and motor goes out the front with the spinal cord. Here we go again. except this time with the brain. So sensory is going to go up through the back to the postcentral gyrus, and then motor comes out through the front from the precentral gyrus and then back down the spinal cord. And then, off the spinal cord, it goes wherever it needs to. All of these are found in the parietal lobe. So precentral gyrus, central sulcus, postcentral gyrus are all in the parietal lobe. What else do we have? Again, cerebellum is down here at the bottom. Then we have the brainstem. The medulla oblongata and the pons are both part of the brainstem. Medulla is right here, and then the pons looks like a little marble that sits on top of the medulla. And then the temporal lobe is right underneath that lateral sulcus, right here. This is the temporal lobe. And I think that's it. Parietal lobe, temporal lobe, frontal lobe, occipital lobe, precentral gyrus, central sulcus, postcentral gyrus, all part of the parietal lobe. Remember, central sulcus runs all the way down to the lateral sulcus. Lateral sulcus has an artery that sits on it, so you should be able to pinpoint where it is. Then got the cerebellum down here. Then we have our brainstem with the pons. It's like a little marble that sits on top of the medulla oblongata. So you will be required to label all of these. Ventricles. So ventricles are cavities of cerebral spinal fluid in the central nervous system, so the brain and spinal cord. And they allow the CSF to reach all parts of the brain, essentially. Here, what you're looking at is an overlap of ventricles that narrow down into a central canal. It's basically a canal, as you would think a canal would do. It goes right down the middle of the spinal cord, and that's there so that the cerebral spinal fluid, the CSF, can communicate with the inside of the spinal cord and not just the outside. So that's what our ventricles do. They're just cavities of cerebral spinal fluid, and they allow the CSF to reach all parts of the brain. Okay. So some brain function, central nervous system. You need to know what these parts of the brain are. You need to know to label them, and you need to know what they do. So first we're going to start with the cerebellum down here. And it's nice because all of this is color coded. So cerebellum, like those two golf balls, right? What does the cerebellum do? The cerebellum coordinates motor patterns, so movement. It just adjusts output of other somatic motor sensors in the brain and the spinal cord. So this fine-tunes movement, essentially. It deals a lot with balance, with fine motor skills. When police do a heel-toe test, if they pull you over, they're doing that to assess your gait. And I don't know if they know, but they are checking your cerebellar function because your cerebellum is affected very easily by alcohol, and if you are intoxicated, you're not going to be able to perform that heel-toe test very well, and that kind of tells the police that you probably should not be driving that vehicle, that you're probably under the influence. So that's what the cerebellum does. It fine-tunes movement, coordinates motor patterns, and adjusts output of other somatic motor centers in the brain and spinal cord. If we were to zoom into the brainstem right here, so this is the brainstem. Let's zoom in. Brainstem consists of the mesencephalon, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So first we're going to talk medulla oblongata. It's down there at the bottom. It's this little rod. It's orange right there. So the medulla oblongata is a sensory relay center. So there are autonomic centers for visceral function, so cardiovascular, respiratory, digestive system. If there's a problem with the brainstem and you lose these functions, you're probably not going to live too much longer. So medulla oblongata is a very important relay center and autonomic center for regulation of visceral function, of that cardiovascular, respiratory, and digestive system activities again. The pons. So the pons is that little marble that sits on top of the medulla oblongata. It relays sensory info too, but it relays it on up to the postcentral gyrus. So it functions in subconscious, somatic, and visceral motor sensors. So things that you don't realize you're doing, things that are automatic to you, like breathing, your sleep-wake cycle, even swallowing. That's what the pons is relaying there. The mesencephalon, so this little green part of the brainstem, that sits right above the pons, and this one processes visual and auditory data. So visual is what you see, auditory is what you hear. It's involved in reflexes. It's involved in maintenance of consciousness. So if you damage this area, you probably will not be conscious. And again, the brainstem is comprised of the mesencephalon, the pons, and the medulla oblongata only. Then up here we have the diencephalon, thalamus, and hypothalamus. So the thalamus relays and processes sensory information. The thalamus collects information from the spinal cord and relays that info to the part of the brain that it needs to get to. So relay and processing center of sensory information. The hypothalamus, it controls emotions. It's a center of autonomic function. Again. I'm sorry. So it controls emotions, autonomic function center, and hormone production. So we'll talk a lot about the hypothalamus in our endocrinology lecture in anatomy and physiology too. We're not going to spend too much time on it here. It is a link between nervous system and endocrine system, but it does a lot with hormone production. And like I said, we're going to talk about it a lot later. So we're not going to spend too much time on it in this lecture. And then we have the cerebrum. So notice the amount of the brain that is cerebrum, okay? The cerebral hemispheres. It's all of this yellowish, tannish color. This is the greatest part of the brain. Cerebral cortex is what we call the brain's outermost area of cerebrum. So you'll hear cerebral cortex a lot. That's this area, this outermost area of the cerebrum. Anyways, this one is frontal lobe. It's the parietal lobe. It's the temporal lobe. It's the occipital lobe. Cerebrum function, it includes conscious thought, so thinking, intellect, memory, both storage and processing. The cerebrum also connects new events to previous events. So if you ever see something and you're like, I'm pretty sure I remember seeing something like this, your cerebrum is connecting that new event to whatever happened previously that, helps you make that connection, and it helps you remember, and then you're consciously thinking about it. That's cerebrum. What else? Conscious and subconscious regulation of skeletal muscle contractions. So when you choose to control or contract a muscle, your brain registers that. That's conscious, right? And then when the brain tells your muscle to do something, or to do its thing, or whatever it needs to do in response to something, that's subconscious. So that's all cerebrum. We're going to move very quickly through the cerebellum. We're just going to zoom into it real fast. All I want you to know is the cerebellum, if you sagittal section, so you cut through it on the side, you see all these little squiggly patterns. You see how it looks kind of like a tree. So that's called the arbor vitae. Arbor vitae. So vita is life, arbor is tree. So this is the tree of life, and that's all you really need to know. That's inside of the cerebellum. Arbor vitae. So be able to identify that and be able to tell me that's the tree of life. So if your cerebellum gets damaged, probably won't be a good thing if it's comprised of the tree of life, right? Okay, moving on. So we're going to spend some time here. Know this. Know these areas. And know what they do, essentially. So these are functional areas of the cerebral cortex, and we're going to discuss what the brain actually does here. So number 1, we have our visual area right here, occipital lobe. So that's the back of the head, right? Right, this one's frontal lobe, this one's occipital lobe. Front of the brain, back of the brain. Our eyes sit on front of the head, like right here, right? So what are we talking about here? Why is our visual area on the back of our head? So the optic nerve, which we'll talk about vision more in an upcoming lecture in the eye. But real fast, the optic nerve actually travels and connects. So eyes sit right here. Optic nerve travels and connects to these little white things. And then they crisscross and we go around the brainstem and we get to the back of the brain. So that's how that works. Optic nerve links from the eyes to the back of the brain to the occipital lobe. Optic nerve connects to the occipital, from the eyes to the occipital lobe. And that's the visual area. It gives us sight, image recognition, image perception. We have our association area, number 2. So temporal lobe, right there. Also right here. Our association area houses short-term memory, equilibrium, emotions. And remember, we have a temporal lobe on both sides of the head. That's our association area. We have a few motor function areas that we'll talk about. So you'll see number 3, motor function, number 12, motor function, number 14, motor function. So instead of just knowing motor function, know what specifically we're functioning. So number 3, motor function area, precentral gyrus. So that's number 3, precentral gyrus. The groove between 3 and 9 is the central sulcus. So that makes number 9 the postcentral gyrus, right? But right now, number 3, motor function area, precentral gyrus. Remember, it's all about motor function, sends information down the spinal cord and out for motor function. So number 3 is precentral gyrus, and it functions in the initiation of voluntary muscle. Number 4, Broca's area right here. So this controls the muscles of speech. It doesn't make the sounds, it just helps the muscles required for speech. So it helps you move your mouth, helps you move your throat, tongue, etc., etc. But it doesn't actually make the sounds for speech. Number 5, the auditory area. So right here. Auditory area, that's for hearing. Your ears would pretty much sit right outside of this area. It's right underneath the ear, I guess right deep to the ear. But it sits right underneath the ear. Your ear would sit right on the outside of this area. And that's our auditory area. Number 6, our emotional area. So number 6, you can only see right here. It's on the inside of the brain, sagittal view of the brain. And the emotional area involves our emotions with pain, with hunger, or with fight or flight. So remember, fight or flight response has to do with sympathetic. We'll talk about that more in an upcoming chapter. But that's our emotional area. You can only see it inside the brain. Number 9, sensory area. So sensations from muscle and skin. That one is post-central gyrus, so right behind the central sulcus. That divides the pre-central gyrus from the post. So pre is motor, post is sensory. So number 9, sensory area. That's what reads our sensations from muscle and skin. Our post-central gyrus, sensory up the spinal cord into the post-central gyrus, number 9. And then the motor response comes from the pre-central gyrus, number 3, back down through the spinal cord and heads wherever it needs to go. Number 10, somatosensory association area. So that one is right here or right there. So between number 9 and between number 1, between the post-central gyrus and the occipital lobe. That's our somatosensory association area. So this one deals with the evaluation of weight, temperature, texture for object recognition. So number 10 isn't necessarily vision, but it helps you decide when you're looking at something, whether it's rough or smooth, whether it's hot or cold, whether it's thick or thin. So it takes in visual cues that'll give you information regarding what you're looking at. The somatosensory association area processes that. It evaluates what you're looking at. So you can tell, is ice going to be hot or cold just by looking at it? Is a pencil going to be thick or thin? Or a sandwich, is it going to be heavy or light just by looking at that object? Okay. Wernicke's area, number 11. So number 11 sits right outside of the auditory area. So it's a C shape. You can also see it here a little bit, but Wernicke's is going to be this shape right there. Wernicke's is all about comprehending written and spoken language. So it surrounds the auditory center, and this area is responsible for understanding what's being said or what's being written. Number 12 is another motor function area. So right here, right here. And number 12 sits in front of the precentral gyrus, and this one is for eye movement and orientation. So if you hear something and move your head to look at what you're hearing, that's number 12's motor function area. Number 13 are higher mental functions. So that's our frontal lobe. So this is all about concentration, planning, judgment, emotional expression, creativity, inhibition. Do you have a filter? Sometimes you'll hear folks say, oh, their frontal lobe isn't quite developed yet, so they don't have any impulse control. So this is what they're talking about. They're talking about number 13, frontal lobe. And then we have number 14, our cerebellum down here, number 14. Again, motor function, cerebellum, but this one's more coordination of movement, of balance, equilibrium, posture, etc., etc. So for this, be able to match part and function and know where it is. Okay, so now we're going to move on to some conditions in the central nervous system. The first one is multiple sclerosis, or MS. So I think most of us have heard of this. So here, the fast nerve insulating myelin is being destroyed. So when this happens, it disrupts communication between the brain and between other parts of the body. So you see a normal nerve on the left with a normal myelin sheath. MS is going to be on the right. So you can see how that myelin sheath is degrading, right? It's going away. It's being destroyed. It's being harmed. If the axon shows on the damaged myelin, then it's got to hop to those areas just like it does the nodes of Ranvier. So with the damaged myelin, all of this gets slowed down. So what's supposed to be happening very, 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 very rapidly, it's not happening rapidly anymore. All of it's getting slowed down. Some signs and symptoms include blurry vision, muscle weakness, issues with balance, paresthesia. So paresthesia is numbing, tingling, prickly, or burning sensation when there's nothing there to cause that. And nothing's cutting off blood flow or anything, or pinching a nerve to cause that paresthesia, that numbing or tingling. So paresthesia is when there's no external cause of numbing, tingling, prickling, or burning sensation. But you still feel it. Signs and symptoms also include attention deficit, memory problems, tremors, and dizziness. So this is pretty broad in general. It's difficult to diagnose just based off the signs and the symptoms. So typically, neurologists and doctors will go through this by deduction, right? So they're crossing things off of a list until they get to this as a potential. But MS is usually diagnosed through MRI and spinal tap and nerve testing. The causes are pretty unknown. There's a correlation between these, and data shows this as potential causes, but scientists don't know why or what actually causes multiple sclerosis quite yet. It could be autoimmune. So when something is autoimmune, your body's responding, but it doesn't know where the problem is. So your immune system just picks something and attacks it, hoping it's the thing that it's supposed to be attacking, right? That's what an autoimmune issue is. People with vitamin D deficiencies haven't been seen to be more prone to MS, but again, correlation, causation. And then MS is actually common in cooler climates, not really in deserts. Again, don't really know why, but this is what data over the years has shown and has pointed at. Another condition, meningitis. So remember the normal meninges, remember the spaces, that epidural space, subdural, subarachnoid space, all between these layers of meninges. Well, when there's an infection of the meninges or inflammation, that's called meningitis, and you can see the swelling there. Okay, so this puts more pressure on the brain spinal cord. So that's where the symptoms actually come from, that extra pressure against the brain and spinal cord. The only one on this list that isn't from that pressure is fever. Fever is associated with infection, so it's not necessarily because there's more pressure on the brain spinal cord. Fever is there because there's a inflammation causing this meningitis. But what are signs and symptoms because of that increased pressure on the brain, or we call it intracranial pressure? Those are intense headaches, light sensitivity, muscle rigidity, convulsions, delirium. So you've heard of people being delirious. Meningitis, people with meningitis become pretty delirious. Causes could be bacterial, could be fungal, could be viral. This is really common in people that live in close quarters, so dorms. It can spread really quickly, so that's why it's very important to get the vaccinations necessary. Doctors can do a chin to chest test, so exactly what it sounds like. They'll have you take your chin and try and touch your chest with it. If you're in excruciating pain, then there's a possibility that you've got some kind of inflammation, probably meningitis, and then they would do blood work to confirm. Alzheimer's, so not Alzheimer's, right? It's Alzheimer's. There's a lot going on here, and I don't necessarily want you to know the super details, but I want you to know the overall what's happening with Alzheimer's. So here, it's an accumulation of amyloid protein and tau protein in the brain. Signs and symptoms include progressive loss of memory first, and then our cognitive function second. And this is over decades. It's pretty slow progressing. So if like one day you can't remember anything, probably not Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's takes decades to develop and get to that point. Some proposed causes are the proposed causes are mostly possibilities. There are several of them. Not sure exactly which ones cause Alzheimer's. There are lots of prospects, so we'll learn about 3 of these. So the first one, defective control of proteins. We do know this one. It's amyloid buildup, makes large sticky plaques that kill neurons. And then those tau proteins form tangles, and they shouldn't form tangles. So we know that that's what's going on with Alzheimer's. But what's causing that defective control of proteins, one new thought is bacteria from the mouth. So a sort of gingivitis bacteria uses 2 enzymes to feed on brain tissue in the hippocampus and in the cerebral cortex. It has direct route to the brain through the blood-brain barrier by entering white blood cells and cranial nerves near the mouth. Amyloid seems to function as a sticky defense against bacteria. The more bacteria, the more amyloid plaques. So basically, amyloid is a defense against bacteria. Maybe the amyloid plaques are a direct result from the bacteria of the mouth, but a significant amount of people with confirmed Alzheimer's that have had dental work done showed correlation with this type of bacteria and amyloid protein buildup. And then the third one, genetics. Some families it runs through. Genes can make an immune protein. That one's called ApoE. And it can be defective. Has too many amino acids, particular amino acid that we won't get into. And then that bacteria, the P. gingivitis, attacks that immune protein ApoE at the amino acid. More amino acid, the more broken up immune protein. And then the patient has a lower defense against this. So that's Alzheimer's in a nutshell. Again, you don't need to know the very, very specifics of like the bacteria, the immune protein or whatever. Just know the proposed causes are defective proteins. So amyloid or tau. Know those 2. Know that it's genetics that can play a factor in this, and then know that bacteria from the mouth is a relatively new idea of what could be causing Alzheimer's. So next is Parkinson's. Parkinson's disease. Here, brain cells become damaged or die in the substantia nigra at the top of the brainstem. So here in this top image, you can see a healthy brain on the left side. You can see a Parkinson's disease before symptoms in the middle. So what's being lit up by that red, that's our substantia nigra. And then you can see after symptoms begin, it doesn't light up red at all, maybe a light orange. So that substantia nigra is dying. So that is the part of the brain that makes dopamine. Okay, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that helps you make smooth movements, not jerky movements, but nice and smooth movements. If you don't have enough dopamine, then you won't have smooth movement. Some signs and symptoms include tremors, shakes, bradykinesia. Anytime you see kinesia, you know it's movement. This one means slow. So brady, slow, kinesia, movement. Not stable movements. Joints are going to be stuck in flexion mode. These people are going to be pretty rigid. It's going to be difficult to get them to turn their head. And that's because the muscles are so tight and stiff. They're going to be held in this flexed wrist, flexed knee, flexed hip, flexed neck, where they look like, if you think of a cartoon of a really old man curled in on himself, that's what people with really progressive Parkinson's disease end up looking like, because all of those muscles are stuck in flexion mode pretty much. And, you know, these folks are unfortunately going to look like that. and they might be in their 30s or early 40s, you know? Not a great place to be. Smooth muscles are also affected here. So not just skeletal muscle, not just the musculoskeletal system, but also smooth muscles. So that can cause difficulty swallowing, that can cause difficulty speaking, eating. There's going to be an increase in urinary infections. Again, smooth muscle, constipation can happen. It's not moving, that bulk through that you need to get out of you. So constipation can happen. And then insomnia. So part of the neurotransmitter can confuse day and night, unfortunately. Some proposed causes are genetic. Unfortunately, here you can trace it in a family tree. So some cases that appear to be traceable through pedigree. And then if it's not genetic, we're thinking maybe environmental exposure, different agricultural or maybe industrial chemicals that can cause that brain cells to be damaged or die in the substantia nigra. Down here, you can see a healthy patient in the bottom picture and a Parkinson's disease patient. And all these black spots here are substantia nigra is completely gone here. So nothing here. DOPA. DOPA stands for dihydroxyphenylalanine. And that's the amino acid from which dopamine is made. You don't need to be able to spell all of that out. That's just a little hint of what DOPA stands for, the amino acid that dopamine comes from. Alrighty, moving on to cranial nerves. So I would definitely suggest making flashcards because this is going to be a big chunk of the quiz. You'll need to know whether they are sensory or motor. So this picture is pretty good because the red fibers are sensory, the blue fibers are motor. You'll have to know Roman numerals. So Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Where's number 8? 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, because this is how these cranial nerves are presented. So you will have to know this. You will have to know the Roman numerals. So make flashcards and study this because you are going to be asked, and do not let it surprise you on the quiz. Okay, so again, red lines are sensory, blue lines are motor. A couple of these are both sensory and motor, okay? So don't be confused. Make yourself flashcards. Let's get into it. All right, cranial nerve number 1. So we have our olfactory. So sensory for the nose, sense of smell. That one's pretty easy to remember. Olfactory. Our optic nerves, cranial nerve number 2, optic nerve. Sensory from the eye, vision. Again, pretty simple. Number 3, our oculomotor nerve. So this one is motor to all eye muscles except those supplied by 4 and 6. So that tells you that you have 2 more nerves that control the eye. So this one is oculomotor. All eye muscles except those supplied by 4 and 6, and it is motor. Number 4, our trochlear nerve. This one is motor, and this one's this little corner muscle, superior oblique muscle. And that's what that one leads to, or from. That one is motor. Okay, let's see. 6. So, yep, we're going to talk about 6 before 5 because we're on eyes right now. The abducent nerve or abducens. So that T is sometimes going to be an S. That is the same thing. This is cranial nerve number 6. It's motor to the external or lateral rectus muscle. So again, on the eye. Number 5, trigeminal. So this one is both sensory and motor. Okay, so trigeminal, number 5 is both. So sensory to face, sinuses, and teeth. Those are our 3 zones. And then motor to muscles and mastication. So the masseter muscle, when you clench your teeth, pops out the side of your face. This nerve goes to the masseter muscle so you can chew. Number 7, our facial nerve. That one is motor to the muscles of the face. So temporalis, orbicularis oris, zygomaticus, etc., etc. That's our facial nerve. All right, number 8, our vestibulocochlear nerve, sensory. This one is sensory. This one is equilibrium. It's balance. It's hearing. It's inner ear. So when you're dizzy, maybe your inner ear is inflamed. So that's what's getting affected here. Our vestibulocochlear nerve, sensory only, number 8. All right, number 9, glossopharyngeal. So anytime you see glosso, that means tongue. Pharyngeal is pharynx. The pharynx is located in the back of the throat, behind the nose. So glossopharyngeal is also motor and sensory, just like the trigeminal. But this one is motor to the muscles of the throat, so pharyngeal musculature. And then it is sensory to the back part of tongue, tonsils, pharynx. So when your tonsils are swollen and hurt, your glossopharyngeal nerve is the one that picks that up and tells you, ouch, they don't feel good, right? All right, our vagus nerve, number 10. So this one's motor and sensory. Another one that's both. Vagus nerve, number 10. Motor to heart, lungs, and digestive tract or gastrointestinal tract. And it's sensory from the heart, lungs, bronchi, trachea, larynx, pharynx, external ear, GI tract. And vagus is both motor and sensory. There's going to be a lot of connection between heart and throat and vagus nerve, and that's because the vagus nerve serves both areas. And we'll talk about that more in A and P2. That connection between mouth and heart, throat and heart. Okay. Number 11, our accessory nerve. All right, this one's motor, goes to the sternocleidomastoid muscle and the trapezius muscle. Remember, trapezius helps you shrug. Sternocleidomastoid helps you turn your head to the opposite side. And then number 12, our hypoglossal motor. So hypo, low, remember hypodermis, right? Glossal, tongue. So this is going to be motor to the muscles of the tongue. So this one helps you stick your tongue out, helps you swish food around your mouth, that type of stuff. So these are the 12 cranial nerves. You'll need to know what goes where. You'll need to know motor, sensory. So study that, make flashcards. Another one you need to make flashcards for because you will be asked this. So these are how we test these 12 different nerves. And again, know these, know the Roman numerals. And actually, you could try these out too. You can try them out on a sibling or a friend. You can try some of these cranial nerve tests. That's what CN stands for. CN number, CN name, CN tests. So the first one, olfactory. How we would test for this is ask to identify the smell of coffee or vanilla. You might think coffee or vanilla, those are pretty light scents. Why wouldn't we try something spicier? So, fun fact. Spice actually does not trigger our olfactory nerve. It actually triggers pain receptors. So, if you like spicy, you like pain, not necessarily taste, right? So, that's why we don't use spice. We use coffee or we use vanilla as our olfactory to test our olfaction, our olfactory nerve. Cranial nerve number 2, optic nerve. So to test the optic nerve, you do it in eye chart. I don't have to tell you what an eye chart is. We've all done it. Most of us. Well, I shouldn't say most of us, but a lot of us wear glasses. And then the rest of us that don't wear glasses definitely had to do an eye test before, is it middle school? in elementary school, one of those two. But yeah, so an eye chart tests the optic nerve. Peripheral vision test. So a doctor or an eye doctor, optometrist could stand behind you and wave their hand until you tell them you can see it through your periphery. And then fundoscope. This is when they look inside of your eye. They're looking for that optic nerve. Fundoscope's always super fun. Our oculomotor nerve. So this one is our pupil reflex. So this is when an optometrist or a doctor, actually, if you've had a head injury, this is when they shine light in the eye and they're looking for the constriction of your pupil. And then they move the light out of the eye, put it back into that same eye. What they're actually looking for as well is that there's consensual pupillary reflex. So they're looking at your eyes one by one, but they're also looking at them both together to make sure they're both constricting consensually together. All right, so that's oculomotor. And then H pattern. So this is when you follow the finger. When you follow the finger up, down, and they cross over your nose, and then you follow it up, down the other side in the pattern H. So that's called the H pattern test. And it's actually checking for eye muscle function. So looking up, looking down, looking left, looking right. Trochlear nerve. It's the same test as number 3. And then abducens is also the same test as number 3. So 3, 4, and 6, those are all your eye muscles, right? They're not your eye muscles. They're all nerves that are motor to your eye muscle. Nerves that are motor to your eye muscles, and they're all going to have that same pupil reflex and H pattern test. All right, cranial nerve number 5, trigeminal. So this one, doctors are going to test by light touch on 3 zones of the face, on the forehead, the cheek, or the chin. Usually they'll use a cotton ball or a cotton swab. And they'll barely just try and touch the peach fuzz on your face and see if you can feel it. They also can do this with corneal reflex, same thing. They try to touch your eyeball, and then if you're blinking too much, not even letting that little cotton swab get close, then you're fine. Everything's working right. They can also have you try and clench your teeth, and they try to pull your chin down. See how strong that is. That's all cranial nerve number 5, the trigeminal nerve that they are testing. Abducens, so cranial nerve number 6, or abducent. Again, same as 3, pupil reflex and H pattern test. Cranial nerve number 7, the facial nerve. Okay, TZBMC. The zebra bit my cheek. That's what I want you to remember. Cranial nerve number 7, the facial nerve, the zebra bit my cheek. So, what does that stand for? T, temporal, Z, zygomatic, B, buccal, so buccal's in your cheek, M, mandibular, and C, cervical. The zebra bit my cheek. Temporal, zygomatic, buccal, mandibular, cervical. That's your facial nerve. Those are the 5 zones of your face. The doctors are going to have you raise your eyebrows, squeeze your eyes together as tight as possible. That's what the Berry Lashes test is. And then they're going to have you smile and see if one side of the smile maybe doesn't go up as high as the other one. If you're drooping on one side, that's all to test cranial nerve number 7, your facial nerve. Cranial nerve number 8, vestibulocochlear nerve. So here is a finger whisper test. So basically you should barely hear it if your fingers are rubbing together. If you can't, then they're going to do a tuning fork test where they put it on the back of your head. See if you can hear the tuning fork. Or no, they're not going to put the fork, but they're going to put the stem of the fork on the back of your head and see if you can hear that sound. And they're testing cranial nerve number 8, vestibulocochlear. All right, cranial nerve number 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve. So this one, they're going to see if you can taste something that's bitter. They're going to try and stimulate your gag reflex. Anytime that you open your mouth and you say ah, doctors are checking a lot of different things, especially if you have a sore throat or whatever. They're looking for inflammation, redness, spots, anything, but they are also looking at the cranial nerve number 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve, to see if when you say ah, your uvula, so that little dangly part at the back of your throat, if it's going straight up and down, okay, or if it's not moving at all. It should go straight up and down if your glossopharyngeal nerve is okay. Number 10, our vagus nerve. That one, the test is going to be the same as number 9. Bitter, uvula, and gag reflex. Number 11, our accessory nerve. This one, shrug C resistance and turn head. So doctor's going to put their hands on your shoulders and see how strong you are at resisting them if they're pushing down on your shoulders. And then same with hands on face and making you turn your head. They're testing the strength of your motor response. So how strong you are at resisting them when they're pushing against you. And then last but not least, cranial nerve number 12, our hypoglossal nerve and midline tongue. Basically, here they're just going to have you stick your tongue out. If it goes towards one side only, then there's something wrong with cranial nerve number 12, your hypoglossal nerve. So these are really, really good indicators, especially for diagnostics, because they don't take that much effort, right? An eye chart. Can you smell coffee or vanilla? Light touches in 3 zones. Raise your eyebrows. So these are, if you're going into medical field, you'll run into these a lot. Definitely the cranial nerve number 9 test, glossopharyngeal with the uvula. Definitely. This is just another picture of everything we just talked about. Visual representation. So know these. This is going to be a big part of your quiz. Know this, okay? Make flashcards. Make flashcards. Know which ones 1 through 12. Know the tests. Know whether they are motor or sensory. Okay? And that's all I have for this lecture.